An ancient bridge and a more ancient tower, a farmhouse that is sheltered by its wall, an acre of stony ground where the symbolic rose can break in flower, old ragged elms, old thorns innumerable.
My mother went along as she always did with anything that the poet felt would help him to write his poetry. But I don't think she looked upon it as a particularly convenient place. Naturally, and he'd hardly say there was no running water, no electricity, no heating, and a great deal of damp. So that while one open fire could be kept going, which kept the poet no doubt warm and perhaps dry, for everybody else it wasn't really ideal.
It was a romantic tower. It was very symbolical. It was full of symbols for him. I mean, otherwise he would have bought a house to live in. And it was full of antiquity. It was full of history, too. The poet needs solitude to write, and he needs silence to write. And he got both of those in the tower.
Yeats' country in Sligo was his given. It was what came with him. Had he never been really talented, he could have written Yeats' country. What we call Yeats' country is young Yeats' country. It was the natural nostalgia of any sensitive individual. The big Yeats' country is what he called an Ireland that the poets have imagined, terrible and gay. The big Yeats' country is a tragic worldview from the battlement of the Tower in Galway.
I declare this tower is my symbol. I declare this winding, gyring, spiring treadmill of a stair is my ancestral stair. That Goldsmith and the Dean, Berkeley and Burke have travelled there.
Thur Ballylee, which he entitles it himself, is a definite platform. It's a podium. It's the place of writing.
A winding stair, a chamber arched with stone, a grey stone fireplace with an open hearth, a candle and written page.
He is there while the world changes. I mean, the world of Ireland changes. Then the world of Europe changes in the aftermath of the First World War. The Russian Revolution occurs. And Yeats is at a pivotal center. Yeats, in an odd way, is almost triumphant that the destruction is coming about, you know. And you feel him holding on to that tower.
Out of Ireland have we come. Great hatred, little room, maimed us at the start. I carry from my mother's womb a fanatic heart.
The most obvious pressure on him was the Irish Civil War, which broke out in June 1922. Republicans, led by De Valera, refused to accept the treaty, signed by Michael Collins and others with Lloyd George, which granted Ireland independence as a dominion within the British Empire.
It's, of course, poetically, it has to be said. It's poetically vivid for him, too. I mean, the Civil War poems are tremendously powerful, and they bring out a particular kind of venom which could not have been brought out, say, by the 1916 poems. And then the general feeling of wretchedness about the new Ireland, that it's all going wrong, that the great heroic images of 1916 and indeed of Parnell are now really being humiliated.
The war lasted until the end of May 1923 and affected Yeats deeply. for he had always closely identified his country's troubles with his own. At Thur Ballylee in 1922, the symbolical tower seemed likely to be attacked by unsymbolical men and weapons at any moment.
My wall is loosening. Honeybees come build in the empty house of the stair. We are closed in, and the key is turned on our uncertainty. Somewhere a man is killed or a house burned, yet no clear fact to be discerned. Come build in the empty house of the stair. A barricade of stone or of wood, some 14 days of civil war. Last night they trundled down the road that dead young soldier in his blood. Come build in the empty house of the stair. We had fed the heart on fantasies. The heart's grown brutal from the fair. More substance in our enmities than in our love. Oh, honeybees, come build in the empty house of the stair.
My father supported the pro-treaty side and the first Free State government, and he was made a senator by them in the 1920s. Whereas my uncle, on the other hand, opposed the treaty, supported De Valera and his party later on. And so, as with so many families at that time, there was this cleavage which led to a certain coolness, I think, for some years.
To add to his troubles, Yeats's father died in New York in 1922 at the age of 81. Upstaged by his more famous offspring, the poet William and the painter Jack, John Butler Yeats often eluded definition. Begetting genius is a good thing. Possessing it is better. John Butler Yeats, happily, did both. When Yeats settled in the New Ireland, he found himself a famous man. Universities gave him honorary degrees. And late in 1922, President Cosgrave appointed him, as a reward for his services to Ireland, to the Senate of the newly formed Free State. The new office suited his mood of dignity and wisdom. Friends insisted that it had made him conservative, but this tendency had begun long before. What was important to Yeats was that he regained the sense of participation in Irish affairs which he had not had for some years.
He leaves to the Catholic native country people and bourgeoisie the gift of a world rendered, a world entitled art, in which the new, anxious, culturally deprived state can say, well, we have got a great world artist who put our weather into the world, who put us into the world. So it reassures the emergent Free State, independent state. He actually helps, he also helps the Irish Protestants who might feel a bit of bad faith at staying on in the Free State. Here is a great world artist, their voice, who committed himself completely to Ireland, unapologetically nationalist. Nationalism was a feature of his thought, and he never flinched from that.
With his new life came material success. Yeats moved with his family to 82 Merrion Square in the fashionable centre of Dublin.
Although he lived in 1939, well into the 20th century, he was imbued, I think, in his sort of training of the 19th century, very, very formal. So the only person I think who could ever call him Willie was his wife, my mother.
The image became a cartoonist delight. There were two I remember in particular. One is of Yeats introducing George Moore to the Queen of the Fairies, which is a very entertaining cartoon. The other one that I remember has the merit of being true. At the time it was drawn by Miss McNee, we were living, W. Yeats was living at 82 Merrion Square, and George Russell, A., was living at 84 Merrion Square, and in between there was 83 Merrion Square. And they set out one afternoon to visit each other for tea. And they passed each other without seeing each other, because one had his head in the air, dreaming away, and the other had his head down to the pavement, and they didn't see each other.
He was also extremely vague and absent-minded. And so my mother made it her business to see that he got where he ought to be at a particular time. He would be in London, for example, and he would send a telegram home saying, I'm having dinner with so-and-so tomorrow night, what do I wear? And she sends back a telegram saying, white tie. In ways like this, she looked after him and saw that his life was run in a way that it ought to be, even in spite of his vagueness.
In 1924, W.B. Yeats was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. Yeats was now a writer of European importance.
This honor is not given to me as an individual, but as a representative of a literary movement and of a nation, and I am glad to have it so.
This, of course, was a tremendous thing for him in making really a world figure overnight, as it were. But also it had its more practical financial implications. My father could be very vague, but he also could be very sharp financially. And it's alleged that when R.M. Smiley, who for many years was editor of the Irish Times, the Dublin newspaper, when he rang him up very early in the morning to tell him that he'd just been awarded the prize, according to Smiley, my father's first words were, how much? Which may or may not be true, but certainly I think the financial implications were important. For example, this table at which we're sitting was one of the things that was bought with the money that came from the Nobel Prize. There were quite a few things like that bought for the house which they hadn't been able to afford before.